is a huge mistake, because Malawi has one of those governments which has been, in terms of government, strongly Christian.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to Da'wah Legacies with your host Abdullah Panjwani, and one of our most unique and special episodes to date. One that actually has a kind of ethos and a kind of title to it, which is the role of empowerment and education in Da'wah, with a perfect, befitting and appropriate guest for this. Respected viewers and listeners, the one, the only, Qasim Okhai. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
How are you?
Thank you. I just wish you hadn't put such a powerful introduction and disappoint people later.
Yeah.
I am a very down-to-earth person. So let's start with that. My background is that I was born in Malawi, and I went to school in Malawi as well, and ending up at secondary school. We could not afford university at that time because there were no universities in Malawi. I then entered the family business and have been in business ever since, though through changing circumstances. Right from childhood and later as a teenager and as an adult, I've been involved in community work and have been very involved in various community projects, including the Jamaats, and more recently, in the last 20 years, if you can call that recent, in Islamic Zakat Fund.
MashaAllah, that's brilliant to hear. And I've always wondered that whenever there's a fire, there had to have been a spark. Where was that spark, the passion for da'wah? Where was it ignited?
I would say that we did not look at da'wah in isolation. We looked at the people around us. We worked closely with the Malawian members who were coming to the mosque, and there was always discrepancies there. And then, of course, the majority of Malawians in the country are Christian. So one thing led to the other, and I got involved in looking at why there are Malawi Muslims and why there are Malawi Christians, and the differences between the various communities. And as a result of that, we saw that the Malawian Muslim community was being left behind for historical reasons. Initially, when Malawi was under colonial rule, or even before that, under the missionaries, Malawians could not get education unless they were Christian, because all the schools were Christian schools. And as it transpired, the people we worked with, we asked them why they had some unusual names. For example, somebody might have a name like Spoonie or a table, and neutral names of objects, and that sounded very unusual. And they explained to us that to get into school, they adopted these names without having Christian names necessarily, so at least they would get a little bit of education. Nonetheless, the community did suffer years of lack of education, and subsequently that led us to very strongly promote Islamic Zakat Fund.
MashaAllah, that makes a lot of sense, and I didn't know a lot of those points that you just mentioned. And Alhamdulillah, you've been in Malawi for how many years now?
Not that many, since birth.
Subhanallah. Very wise way of putting it, subhanallah.
Yeah.
And what I've always wanted to ask also is that with all these years that you've been in Malawi, mashallah, is there any specific kind of quality that you've noticed within Malawians that has really attracted you?
This is the major issue that I think is very important for not only the community but for the country. If you look at any Malawi village before, and in most cases now, you will find the people are down to earth. You will find that they are honest, they are hardworking, they have respect for the law, and they will respect the infrastructure that is in the village, starting with the chief and later leading on to paramount chiefs and the district commissioners. Those qualities, which you can call good village qualities, are the same as good Islamic qualities. and there are a lot of the same qualities in other religions as well. When a layer of education is given to children, be they Muslims or Christian, what is generally happening or has been happening is that those children are not told to keep their ethics. So the educators are giving them an education how to read and write. And they feel they should throw out everything, throwing out all the good values and not replacing them with anything. So it's most important that those children or even adults retain the good values, good Islamic values, which we recognize very well, of good, sensible approach to anything. And those were the same values when the country became independent that the political side was promoting, of honesty, hard work, and in our case it would be adherence to the Islamic values of regular prayers, respect for parents, respect for authority. So with the layer of education, a lot of times these get lost, and very often they become a bunch of hooligans. I'll give an example if you don't mind. I had one foreman, a Malawian, not educated, and he used to supervise a team of 5 people. I could leave a building to them, nothing would go wrong, nothing would get stolen. And one day I found him sitting on the floor teaching a young Malawian how to lay stones. And I said, "Look, mister, you are a foreman, you can't afford to sit there and teach one person. You have to supervise the work." He said, "Sir, I'll come and see you." So after they finished their work, he explained to me that his team and himself stay in one house in the town. The reason is he did not want his people from his village to mix with the town people, because they will become a bunch of crooks, or he will lose control and he will lose discipline. So he said, rather than getting somebody who is experienced, I'd rather bring somebody from my village. I will teach him and he can do the job. And the reason I'm teaching this one man, because from my team, one guy began mixing with the town people, and that led to a lot of problems. So these are the values, if in the dawah work, if these can be imparted, that these are just as important as the dawah that you are giving or any of us are giving. Giving dawah is not just preaching about Allah and the prophets and prayers and things like that. It is also showing by example how we live with honesty and integrity and hard work.
Right, so being like a role model Muslim.
It has to be. For example, if I am smoking and I tell you not to smoke, it has no impact. But if I don't preach at all, no dawah, nothing, but if you see a Muslim family or a Muslim community, the way they are living and the way they are behaving, you will naturally become a Muslim. You will adopt their good qualities.
Right. Or at least try to investigate or ask more about it. Right?
Of course.
And I'm sure a lot of people, just from these few minutes that we've discussed, have seen how passionate you are about education, mashallah. So I've always wanted to ask, and I wanted to ask, when it comes to your academic education from the time you were young, was it all in Malawi?
It was all in Malawi. We could not afford university education, which of course is every child's dream. So you do without it. Availability was up to secondary school, and the rest you learn as life goes on. You watch other people, you learn from people who visit you, you learn from others, you learn from elders.
Right, mashallah. And when it comes to using education in da'wah, da'wah is education to a certain extent, like you mentioned earlier, because we're trying to portray and we're trying to convey a kind of message and a kind of image of ourselves, right? So now, together with education, empowerment is something that you alluded to earlier with that foreman situation and that foreman incident.
As far as my viewpoint is concerned, I consider dawah as a form of education. You may be educating certain aspects of the religion, you may be teaching them other things. But as a form of education, then alongside that, if they see that they are also being taught skills, and those skills can only come after some basic education. For example, I visited a Muslim school in the Mangochi area, and the teachers took time off during their holidays without pay to learn how to teach the kids technical things. At the end of the term, they invited us to see, and we saw shoes made, we saw kettles, we saw watering cans and so on. And what we saw most importantly was the enthusiasm of the kids. I mean, you don't see kids very excited being at school, but these kids during the holidays were making these things, and very often people from outside do not realize that a child in a village does not have a pair of scissors, does not have a hammer. The dawah, the education and the empowerment all interconnected. You cannot isolate if you are going to be meaningful. You can teach somebody as much dawah as you want, but if the person is going to starve, it's not going to last very long. Either that person is going to be dead or is going to abandon any teachings that you have given. If they have an education, primary or any kind of education, it can be vocational, it can be some skills that are taught, anything that will give them a way of earning a living. It could be agricultural.
Right. You mentioned earlier also that you are involved with Islamic Zakat Fund and quite a few other Islamic organizations over your years and Jamaats. Now, of course, you must have seen a lot of different priceless experiences and memories. Out of all of those, do any come to mind right now that is the most memorable da'wah experience?
We can say that when we started IZF, from the outset we said there are so many needs. There would be widows, there would be food requirements, there are so many requests that will come, medical, all well deserving. And it took a lot of determination, to the extent that some of our members even resigned when we insisted on sticking to education, that we would refuse aid for anything else. And they felt that was very, very unreasonable of us. But as a result of that, in the last 20 years, we have educated over 4,000 graduates. Something like 20,000 or more have gone through secondary schools. And we are also supporting other organizations in their activities. For example, we have a relationship with the Deza Welfare Fund. These are the Asians from UK who want to support people in Malawi, particularly in Deza. And they might tell us to run an agricultural class. They might tell us to teach the village to plant certain types of seeds and things like that. The impact has been that by emphasizing from the university level downwards, we have created leaders in the country. We have IZF graduates who are in the central bank, in the banking system, who are MPs, one or two are ambassadors, and these are the people who can influence not only the events in the country, but also in their communities. And we have a few hundred nurses, and the impact you can imagine of those nurses. I'll give a small example. One of our members, late Ismail Lambat, was at the Central Hospital, and a nurse was attending to him, and he looked up and he saw that she was in a hijab. So he asked her, out of curiosity, because it wasn't that common at that time. He asked who she was and how come she was in a hijab, and she laughed and said, "Mr. Lambat, I am one of your graduates." So you can see the impact and what that girl will be able to impart to her own family, to her own community. We have doctors in the country, not enough, but we have quite a few, we engineers. And those are shining examples of, I would say, contributions by IZF, but actually it is their own real achievements, not ours. We are just facilitators.
Right, I see what you mean. And I've always wanted to ask that when it comes to da'wah, we've got da'wah on one side, and a lot of da'wah organizations want to kind of isolate themselves away from the government or away from civil society. How do you feel the mesh should be?
It's a huge mistake, because Malawi has one of those governments which has been, in terms of government, strongly Christian. Nothing wrong with that as far as a majority Christian country is concerned. So Malawi should allow the dawah in such a way that they work closely with government. And very often we are missing the point and we are missing the boat. And Malawi has been open to Muslims. For example, the head of the intelligence unit was a Muslim. He was a IZF graduate. Unfortunately, he died. The head of CID was a Muslim, and unfortunately, he died a few years ago. And we have similar examples. We have the high courts being lenient at the start of the careers of Muslim lawyers who came from Uganda and Zanzibar. But they alerted us to say, these are new people, please advise them to get more training with other lawyers before they appear in the High Court. So we are very fortunate that Malawi Muslims can do that. Now, previously, employees of government were afraid to say that they were Muslims. But after independence, and in particularly what is referred to as the second independence after Muluzi came in, you could hear a greeting, Assalamu alaikum, when you visit some government offices. And as you know, the Secretary of the Treasury was a Muslim. He is now heading the largest corporation in Malawi. But of course, he can't just say, I'm a Muslim and that's all I will do. That's not enough. He has to do his job. Everybody has to perform and at the same time be good Muslims. Right. Integration, communication with the churches, with the government organizations, being part of the NGO organizations, very, very important factors, and that is where they can benefit as well, those various organizations. Operating in isolation is never going to be as beneficial.
MashaAllah, I'm sure I can speak for everybody when I say that, MashaAllah, you seem to ooze wisdom out of you, out of your pores, alhamdulillah, everything that you're saying, not only now, but alhamdulillah, with many different functions and many different conferences, alhamdulillah, every time I've heard you, there seems to be a wisdom and advice within everything that you say.
It is based on whatever I see. It's nothing that is new. For example, if you walk into a village and you see that there is water maybe 200 meters away and yet the village is starving. All they need is some education, some guidance, something or the other. They can easily dig a canal or they can do something or the other. But they have been so used to being given instructions for historical reasons that they hesitate to do anything new. And that is where the education, working with government, asking the ADDs, the Agricultural Extension Officers, for help, and others, and where necessary, demanding, because they are citizens of this country. They are born here and they have equal rights.
Right. We had a guest earlier on a few episodes ago by the name of Hanif Muntali. I'm not sure whether you know him or not. And he was mentioning a very pertinent point that a lot of times Muslims are very selfish with the da'wah. They don't really want to convey it as Muslims. So a lot of people out there may want to start their own da'wah organizations or may want to join a da'wah organizations, and they just need a bit of spark, a bit of advice. What advice would you give to any up and coming Muslims that want to involve themselves in the da'wah space?
I would say basically whichever area they're going to work in, and Malawi, as you know, north to south is not easy to cover. Like your organization, IRA, is doing, is one of the best organizations that I have seen in terms of being organized, in terms of record keeping, in terms of its staff. So if they want to start any dawah work, they got to have their own strength, be it one person or a team of 10 people. Doesn't really matter. And in that way, not try to do everything. The weakness with most Muslim organizations in Malawi is if they want to do dawah work, then they'll do a bit of medicine, they'll do a bit of this, they'll do a bit of that, and the impact is lost. Rather, if you focus, so if there's an organization, for example, there's a group of young people who brings in doctors from outside, and that's all they do. Their impact will be far more, and I consider that as part of dawah because they are Muslims. They are behaving in a way where they are showing that Muslims care for other people. And that will lead to a better understanding and a better situation for Muslims in Malawi.
MashaAllah. And like you mentioned earlier, that regarding IRA, Alhamdulillah, we had a presentation earlier on regarding IRA. And I wanted to ask that, what do you find most attractive regarding IRA, together with what you mentioned earlier?
Unusually, for a Muslim organization, one, it has a long-term plan. Most of us, or most of the people who give charity, who get involved in charity, will address an immediate need. For example, food distribution is a favorite, and then it ends. Or it might be some celebration and they give out food and that's the end of it. It has no lasting impact. In the case of IRA, from what I have seen, and I have attended some of your functions before, it has a long-term plan. And that long-term plan is not throwing food, not throwing money, but teaching them, and that will encourage other organizations to emulate what IRA is doing in the field, and then the reporting system is very well organized as well. So I must say I was quite impressed.
Alhamdulillah, that's great to hear. May Allah continue to make us ambassadors, global ambassadors of Islam, and make us a means of benefit and guidance for as many people as possible.
Ameen.
So now, tying into the name of this podcast, which is Da'wah Legacies, what I'd love to ask you is that 10, 20, 50 years down the line, is there any one particular quality that you'd like the name Qasim Okai to be associated with?
Not in a personal capacity. I would say that for the work that we are doing, in the case of IRA or in the case of IZF, the legacy we would like, or at least that we dream about, is that we are leaving behind a community that is educated, the community that has leaders who can uplift not only their own community but the whole country, that they are contributors to the whole country's development, people of integrity, honesty, hard work, the very qualities that they already had and the very qualities that their forefathers had, to be re-established and to pass on to their respective children.
MashaAllah, very short, concise, compendious words of advice. May Allah bless you infinitely in your health, your wealth, your knowledge, your time, and your family. Jazakallah khair for everything.
I would appreciate if we keep me at a down-to-earth level. Don't elevate me unnecessarily.
No, these are just du'as, inshallah, for the blessings, inshallah.
No, I really appreciate, and I thank you and your team for inviting me for this talk.
It's always a pleasure and it's our honor. Jazakallah khair.
Ameen.
This has been your host Abdullah Panjwani with one of the most enlightening, informative and beneficial episodes yet, alhamdulillah, with Qasim Okai. Jazakallah khair to one and all for your continuous support and advice towards developing this episode and this podcast called Da'wah Legacies. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe for even more exciting episodes and even more great guests. And on that note, to one and all, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.